Welcome to the Black Writers Museum, and also welcome to the Souvenir Tour of Germantown, hosted by the Historic Germantown and the Black Writers Museum. This is a tour that talks about and speaks to the African American presence in Germantown, particularly the 22nd Ward, as it was referred to in the early 20th century, 50 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. So in celebration of the 50-year anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, folks all across the nation were celebrating in this regard. And they were of different types of folks. There was a collection of people that celebrated, encouraged by W.E.B. Du Bois. And then there were also some folks who celebrated, encouraged by Booker T. Washington. And during the early 20th century, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois philosophically were, I guess you could say, sparring, and had two different approaches to the participation of African Americans in the nation of America at the time. And so this was not, this was an instance or a situation that a lot of folks were familiar with. Academics still talk about this discussion between W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. The Souvenir of Germantown was a publication that was printed by a family in Germantown who established a printing company, the Baugh family, who lived particularly in Germantown, in North Germantown. And they spoke to the philosophy of Booker T. Washington, which was a concept of, I call it the James Brown concept. I don't want nobody to give me nothing, open up the door and I can get it myself. Mm-hmm. And so Booker T. Washington's perspective, to put it in a nutshell, was if you give us the opportunity like anyone else, we'll thrive and we can stand on our own. And actually, W.E.B. Du Bois had a philosophy that was similar. It was just two different approaches to that. And so today we're doing a tour that speaks to that particular participation in African American growth and development in the early 20th century and how it happened here in the 22nd Ward.
So you want to talk a little bit, just back up a second, we'll talk a little bit about the Black Writers Museum and Historic Germantown.
Yes, you can go ahead. Okay. The Black Writers Museum was founded in 2010 in a small storefront in Maplewood Mall, right around the corner from here, 2,200 square feet. And then about 2012, we moved into the historic Vernon House. It was a great partnership with the city of Philadelphia. This is a historic property here built in the 1790s. And we collect our repository for and exhibit classic and contemporary Black literature and present it in a way that children, students, and the general population can learn about the impact that Black literature has had on the development of American culture.
So as Supreme said, the souvenir, and we actually have the physical copy of this document. It's a small little document, basically 4 by 6 inch or so pamphlet that was printed here in Germantown by the Baugh family publishers in 1913 in honor of the 50th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. Booker T. Washington and Du Bois had basically called on all communities around the country to celebrate this golden anniversary. And they themselves were actually behind doing a lot of the organizing, especially in larger cities, New York, Washington. Philadelphia had one of the largest celebrations. It's largely forgotten at this point, but it was basically an 8-week festival in 1913. The state legislature actually gave money for Philadelphia African American community in 1913 to organize a festival that probably around 100,000 people participated in. They had parades, they had athletic events, they had concerts, they had speeches. They had a little village they built down at what's now Marconi Plaza, way in South Philadelphia. So again, a whole piece of history that a lot of folks have forgotten about. This is a piece of it. This is folks in Germantown saying, hey, we know sounds familiar, right? We know a lot of the celebrations are down in downtown somewhere. Don't forget about us in Germantown. So.
And so it was particularly interesting because during the turn of the century in 1899, this is when Thurgood Marshall. This is when W.E.B. Du Bois published the Philadelphia Negro under the auspices of University of Pennsylvania. He did a study on the black presence in Philadelphia, and he focused on the 7th Ward, which was South Philadelphia. And so we speculate that this is kind of a response to that in 1913 about there also prominent progressive black folks who live in the 22nd Ward. And see, during that time as well, Germantown was kind of like almost a suburb to Philadelphia. And so they had a significant presence in here, African Americans. And so the Baugh family published this in regard to just speaking to that particular issue about the existence and the progressiveness of blacks in Philadelphia, but particularly in the 22nd Ward. And so this souvenir was a publication, the Souvenir of Germantown was a publication that spoke directly to that addressed issues of business, of religion, of education, and talked about the general existence and the general lives of progressive black people in Germantown.
So we've talked about it a little bit already. We're using a number of lenses to understand this document, and we'll go through a little bit what's in it. It's an odd document. There's really nothing else we've come across that's like it. This kind of dueling philosophies between Du Bois and Washington is evident within the book. The sense that it's called a souvenir, right? So it's also a promotional book promoting Germantown, saying, hey, they actually say how easy it is to get up here from Center City, right? They talk a little bit about the history and what's here. So folks in Germantown, literally since the last 200 years, have been trying to convince people in other part of the city that we're important up here and you should come up here. So yeah, what's in it? There's a title page. There's a poem that was written well before the souvenir is published by one of the Baugh brothers. There's a foreword, again, a very brief history overview. And then most of the book, and this is the extraordinary thing about it, and what we'll see when we go on our walk, is a photographic documentation of the physical presence of the black community in Germantown. The homes, the businesses, the shops, the churches, the social institutions that were here, that really, as far as we can tell, no one else was really trying to systematically document at that time. So it is, it clearly has some influence from Du Bois. It's somewhat of a sociological document, and it also did a lot of what Washington was trying to do in kind of documenting the economic impact of the black community in different places around the city. It puts the dollar value on the property. It has a lot of kind of demographic statistics.
So here we have a statement about Booker T. Washington. All the Negro race asks is that the door which rewards industry, thrift, intelligence, and character be left as wide open for him as for the foreigner who constantly comes to our country. More than this, he has no right to request less than this. A republic has no right to vouchsafe. And so this souvenir looked at the homes and the businesses and the churches and the impact of African Americans and American culture from Southwest Germantown all the way through close to Chestnut Hill, through West Mount Airy.
Yeah. we mentioned that it did have pieces of history, and the other dialogue that is happening within the souvenirs, an explicit one. The Site and Relic Society at that time was the official history organization, now known as the Germantown Historical Society. They published Charles Jenkins' guidebook to Germantown, 150 pages of all the important houses and sites. Clearly the Baugh family was familiar with this because they actually not only quoted it, they in effect clipped 2 pages, assuming with permission.
1913.
1913, copyright, I don't know. But
It says it down there.
yeah. Exactly.
Okay, written permission.
Right, by the author.
Themselves.
Yes, it does. So out of this 150 pages, Baugh found only 2 references, historic references that he thought were worthy to repeat. Only 2 out of that entire book that had, he thought, anything to do with the African American community. And even then, almost tangentially, right? In some ways. This is an image of Thomas Kunder's house where the 1688 petition against slavery was signed by 4 Germantown Mennonites and Quakers. Quote unquote, the first known written protest against enslavement in the British colonies. So an important document, an important part of the history. Baugh speculates to some extent, the prevalence or lack of prevalence of slavery, enslavement in Germantown. The only other historic reference from that he mentions is the kind of story, the legend of Dinah at Stettin, who, the enslaved woman that, according to legend, in the Battle of Germantown, 1777, used her quick thinking to divert British soldiers from burning the estate. So there's a lot of places depicted on this map. You see the red dots. This is where we've been able to track and trace sites, which is not easy because the places depicted don't always have street addresses or even formal names. There's something like, this construction is used a lot. This is our butter and eggs dealer. Picture of a building, you don't know where in the neighborhood it is or who it is, right? So some of this stuff we still don't know. So there's a lot more research to be done. But I think what this shows is there was no one, quote unquote, section of the neighborhood that was predominantly only black families. The little cluster at the bottom is Pulaski Town. That's what we'll be doing the tour in the fall. That was the heaviest cluster, but you see stuff scattered around a little bit. It's not to say that the blocks weren't segregated. They were segregated. There were blocks that were mixed or predominantly African American, but it's a little different than the 7th Ward, where there's a more clearly delineated kind of section that was, this is the African American community. Spatially it's interesting and probably a lot more to do there. So we're just going to run through quickly some of the types of places depicted here, not all of them. We do have a full copy of the souvenir if you want to thumb through it after the tour. So churches.
Yes, we have a series of churches that are historic in Germantown, particularly relevant to the African American experience. 2 particular ones we can talk about today is Grace Baptist Church, which is now that's on Johnson Street, right off of Germantown Avenue. That's the church that a lot of folks might know of, where Reverend Jeremiah Wright was the pastor of that church. And we also have Enoch Tabernacle Baptist Church, which is a church really well known now that's turned into a mega church with over like 11, 12, 13,000 members. They still exist on Coulter Street, and but they have another church. They have another building, and their primary house of worship, if that's the same primary house of worship, is on off of Cheltenham Avenue now. But these 2 churches played a prominent role in where blacks went to not only worship, but also to organize, to teach, and to socialize. So the church was a significant and focal point for the African American community. And so they used that to do social things, business things, and also religious services.
Yeah, and as you can see in this last example, so there were a lot of these places have, the churches have moved, they've built new buildings. In some cases, Grace, Enon and Grace are examples of that. Some, they're largely almost identical as to they were in 1913. I mean, this is the historic photo and the contemporary photo. Now, the name of the church, the congregation has changed, but the building is largely similar. And we'll talk more about it. Yeah, if you were a business leader, you were expected to be then a leader in your church. And you were also expected, and the church was then expected to also support and foster the educational and social institutions. So it was a pretty tight circle. You know, the Enon started the Hill School, which we'll talk about in a little bit, for example. Almost all the churches had education programs that they were sponsoring, either individually or collectively.
And that was typical of the era and the time. All through the church the black church was a significant factor and element in the fighting oppression and for the bolstering of efforts, abolition efforts.
We're going to actually on the tour take a look at John Trower's headquarter building. Trower was a major figure. Known both regionally and nationally, was one of the wealthiest black men in the country through his catering and real estate businesses. So we'll take a look at his house. The barber shop, we'll look at the site. I think that building is gone, is missing. We won't get as far up as the Baugh Publishing House today, but they had a house and business in the same area.
And we'll talk about that as we walk through.
Yeah. I mean, something, this slide notes as well, and again, this antique furniture dealer is no longer extant. It was on Cheltenham Avenue, kind of right across from where that shopping plaza is now. Employed black people in the building, but their clientele was primarily white. And so that kind of dynamic between who was served by these establishments, who owned them, and who worked in them is a really interesting one, depending on the business and where it was located, kind of both spatially and otherwise.
And that speaks to the dual psychology of the African American experience in early America, early 20th century, of how their businesses at times, and we'll talk about this when we walk. Their businesses at times actually address the issues of white people in the area, and though they use the proceeds to benefit the move for independence and for more liberation for black folks in the community. So that's a really interesting dynamic that took place during that time.
The Baugh family itself is worthy of its own study and tour. They were part of this migration that came up from the Upper South in the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. This is pre-classic Great Migration, which typically starts around World War I. But there was a major movement from Delaware, Maryland, to Virginia. Around the Civil War era, there were a couple hundred black people living in Germantown. By 1913, depending on the statistics, between 5,000 and 10,000. So a big boost. The Baugh family is one of those. They came up from Richmond, and post the brothers establishing the printing business, you can see they kept the family name through the fifth. And became, steadily, more and more illustrious. John Gordon Baugh V, is professor emeritus at Stanford, very well-known linguist. Aerospace engineers, photographers, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a family that landed here, established themselves, and didn't stay in the neighborhood, but really kind of used Germantown as a launching pad.
And here we have Dr. Warwick and Dr. Bailey. They were two businesses, medical businesses that were part of the Germantown community. And we'll walk past the homes and speak to their particular input and their particular activity. And one of the very few, of not only doctor in this area that actually took care of the white residents as well. And we'll talk to that specifically.
Yeah. The souvenir doesn't really name a lot of names, right? It names places, names of organizations. It typically reserved the naming of names for a couple of the doctors. Again, so kind of participating in that kind of class-based approach. Dr. Warwick was one of them. Well known, written about, the second African-American graduate from Penn's medical school. And again, this quote, this is years ago in the 80s. There was a lot of oral history done, and this is from that effort. So Warwick was one of probably the first black person to move onto this block. Didn't get pushed back because he was a doctor, right? And folks remember. If this is someone talking about this 50, 60 years later, right? That clearly that made an impact.
And through our research and actually human testimony, we found that there's a trace of more of Dr. Warwick's family still in Germantown to this day.
Right. Yeah, isn't the photographer you work with?
Yeah, the photographer that we use is a relative of the Warwick family.
And we just found that out just by doing this tour, right?
Yes. I think I called her one day. I was like, you need to come down and take some photos. And we were talking about the tour itself. And she was like, yeah, that's a great uncle of mine. And so we were able to actually call some more to gather some more information regarding the impact of the Warwick family through generations.
Right. You mentioned businesses, this Penn Cafe, different section of the city. We're not going to see it today, but it says, and this note is one of the few that would serve African Americans. Some of the oral history pieces we have said it was the only restaurant. It was owned and run by Esther Baker. So that was the only public eating establishment in the area that welcomed.
And this is going to be part of our the Penn and Priscilla Street, Mars Street, Penn Cafe. That's part of the next tour that we'll do in the Pulaski Town area. Right. And some of those homes you'll see still exist.
Yeah, and we'll see the real estate thing. We just discovered this building where it is recently. Did want to talk on the Bird Quarry. This is, again, one of those really dynamic folks, William Byrd. A lot of the buildings and houses that were owned and built by the African American community, he supplied the stone for. Mm-hmm. So, interesting kind of circular economy. And folks may not remember or realize that the Klan was actually in Germantown, started in 1926. So after, 13 years after the publication of the Souvenir, but Byrd was still active, still, doing well then. And one of his houses was burnt by the Klan. Again, one of those stories that a lot more research needs to be done.
And here we have, once again, down in the Pulaski Town area, Southwest Germantown, we have the Wissahickon School Club and Culture at Pulaski Avenue. And you can see the photo of the building now that still exists, and where they gave classes for children, and I think pottery and basket weaving. And so a lot of the activity in Southwest Germantown actually drove a lot of the activity throughout Germantown and the Philadelphia area.
There are very few pictures of people in the souvenirs, mostly buildings in terms of the photography. So there are a couple, only a couple pictures of people, and there's really a lovely picture of this class, the school club, and then this one as well, the cast of Sleeping Beauty in 1913. So again, just trying to demonstrate the kind of importance of these social institutions that were being created, oftentimes in or out of the churches, but separate at the same time, is really integral to the life of the community here. Schools as well. And we'll look at the site of the Joseph Hill School, really arguably the most impactful single organization in the community for, especially the first half of the 20th century.
And it's right on the north side of Vernon Park.
Right.
We'll walk right through there.
Yeah. And then lots of houses, all different sizes and types. And Brooks was the pastor at Enon, and really a civil rights activist before that term was used, but that was one of his main passions. Yeah. And again, you can just see this is a historic photograph, contemporary, very similar in some cases. So that's part of what we're trying to do with this tour, is kind of just recover the sense that although these places look anonymous and ordinary when you're walking by, that there's probably layers of significance that folks, that there aren't historic markers outside of Dr. Warwick's house or the real estate agents, and you'd walk by and probably not look at it twice, but these were important places. And this old garage, this is as far up as it goes, right, Supreme?
Yes, this is on Carpenter Lane.
Yeah.
Which is Westmount area.
Right.
And it's interesting because when I saw this photo, I looked at it and I remember that I went to school in Westmount area, C.W. Henry, which was on Carpenter Lane. And so I remember that garage, and that was in the early 70s. And so, of course, it wasn't back in the teens.
Right.
And I remember the home on Good Street. I used to play and had friends actually that lived in that home.
And then they kind of end the booklet with these statistics. Again, this is a kind of a blend of what Booker T. Washington and Du Bois were doing. Washington published similar things in terms of, the economic footprint or impact of black-owned businesses in Virginia, for example. So this is really enumerating the value, the taxable value of the property that black people owned, the number of churches, right? And then specifics in the types of businesses: 4 physicians, 2 trained nurses, 3 printers, 1 milliner, the butter and eggs dealer that we still need to find where they were. We don't know where that was.
We know now butter and eggs, they're expensive now.
So. 2 policemen, 1 retired policeman, right? Really, really trying to get this granular sense of the professions, the overall proportion of the population in Germantown. And this really interesting little debate. The police, it says the police said that there were 10,000 people here. The official census says 5,000 black people, more like, roughly numbers. And is speculating, that there may have been a fair amount of folks moving through the neighborhood, and that's why the police numbers are higher. And this is a very Booker T. Washington approach, is that in the end, basically saying how productive the black community is, and there are no beggars, right? You will nary see. That's the last word in this entire document.
It says, while there may be a number who won't work, the percentage is hardly greater than among other races. And a Negro beggar is seldom, if ever, seen on the streets.
Right. Final word. So that's the souvenir. We really wanted to give you a sense before we start taking a little tour around the few blocks around here. Questions, thoughts before we begin?
I just think it's interesting, the population breakdown.
Yeah.
they have the number of males of voting age listed.
Right.
Yeah, 1913, so women could vote.
Women could not vote, right?
And black men were exercising their right to vote.
Yeah,
They were on the rolls.
Yeah, good point, really good point. So, any other questions, thoughts before we head out?
Right. For many years,
One of the primary institutions for educating the black community for several decades. Hill School, founded just after the end of the Civil War in 1868 by William Cole, and named after Joseph Hill, who's a pioneering educator in the 19th century. Oral histories that I was referencing earlier talk about the Hill School and reference how strict the teachers were. They did not brook any excuse in terms of slacking on learning, and set a really high standard for their students. Needless to say, it was an entirely African American teaching corps of about 6-7 teachers, depending on the time. In theory, in 1913, Philadelphia schools were desegregated. And in 1910, Germantown High School was built just, half a block away from here. In practice, it wasn't really desegregated at that point. It wasn't until decades later that happened. So, and certainly no black teachers were teaching in those schools. So the Hill School was especially important for that aspect. And folks, it really also emphasized, especially teens, 20s, 30s, African American literature, music. Marian Anderson would come to the school. There were pictures of Frederick Douglass and probably Du Bois and Booker T. Washington on the walls. So it was an Afrocentric curriculum before that was a term, and I think really important. Again, from the oral histories, really important for the students to absorb that.
Yes, and in 1935, the principal of the Joseph E. Hill School was Nellie Bright, a really well-known black woman who a book was named after her called Bright April. And what year was that published? Do you recall?
That was 44.
It was published in 44, and so there were a lot of prominent folks that actually were raised in the Joseph E. Hill School that had their primary education there.
Yeah, William Coleman, who was secretary under Carter or Clinton. Yeah. Alan Ballard, who's a famous, famous academic, artist. Roland Ayers. So a lot of folks came through the school, made their mark across the country. There should be, it may be under snow now. There should be a marker somewhere up here.
I think to the left is a
Right.
marker.
Right.
I think it's covered in snow now.
The name exists. There's the Hill Friedman School. I think it's up in Mount Airy now.
Yes.
Yeah, East Mount Airy. So that's a vestige of the old Hill School.
The marker is covered in snow. Of course, we had the severe footage of snow over the last 2 months. 60 days. Can you see it?
So again, relatively recent that it was torn down, just in 1980. The marker put up in 87 by the Alumni Association. So clearly a beloved place. Not sure what the rationale for tearing it down was, other than the fact that it was probably not being used, as Germantown High had been fully integrated by then. Certainly.
And this was posted in 87 by alumni of Joseph E. Hill School. So it existed from 1904 to 1980. And that's why we asked if we know anybody that graduated from or went to Joseph Hill School.
This church, we could just tuck around here, is also listed in the souvenir. It was St. Barnabas Episcopal at that time. And actually, Supreme mentioned Nellie Bright, who was the principal of the Hill School for many years. Her family came to Germantown originally because her father was the pastor there, the priest at St. Barnabas. It's largely looks very similar. I'm not sure they would have had an asphalt shingle roof, but other than that, the building looks remarkably similar and intact. It's Mount Tabor Baptist Church now. A church here, another church here that was also listed in the souvenir. The school, United House of Prayer was a little newer, but this would have been one of the epicenters. With at least 2 churches and a school within a block or 2 of each other. So.
And as we come back down Germantown Avenue, we'll talk about some of the businesses that were on Germantown Avenue right off of Rittenhouse.
Right. So we're going to walk up this way to Harvey Street, look at Dr. Warwick's home and office. But any other thoughts or questions as we stroll along? This housing dates to the 19th century along this block. You see a lot with these what are called mansard roofs, Second Empire style. That would have been popular in the late 19th century. City Hall is an example of Second Empire building. Yeah, the row house is one of the distinguishing features of Philadelphia architecture dating back to the colonial period.
And that's what makes Germantown so interesting because of the different housing style.
Right.
That you'll find from block to block.
Right.
You'll go from a block of singles to a block of row houses to twins.
Right. And so, the development of Germantown, and this certainly would have impacted the community moving here in the late 19th century, was early colonial village to a streetcar suburb with a lot of wealthy folks building summer homes here or kind of Victorian era villas, and they could commute daily with the 2 railroads into Center City. So it was the first street railroad suburb in the country, dating back to the 1830s. And then going into the 19th century, more and more mills and manufacturing moved in, and so you had a lot of the smaller infill house being built mostly for workers. And Baugh does mention that a lot of black men especially were working at some of the mills and manufacturers, even in 1913 at that point.
And as we approach Harvey Street, we'll get to see the actual home that Dr. Warwick had his practice. He lived in and had his practice. And then we'll look up further up Cherokee Street and talk about where the Baugh family had their press and where they lived.
Warwick graduated from Penn, the second African-American doctor through Penn's program. He worked at Frederick Douglass Memorial Hospital that Douglass himself helped found, along with Dr. Moselle, who was the first black graduate of Penn's medical school. Moselle is a big name locally. Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander is, the first woman law school graduate of UPenn. Her home was up in Mount Airy. So when we were doing research for this, there were a number of articles about Dr. Warwick, including the fact that he was a famous track star.
So this is Harvey Street. This is speaks to particularly the difference in housing stock and how it can change in Germantown from one block to another. We're coming off a block of row houses onto a block of singles and twins. And Harvey Street is the street that Dr. Warwick, where he had his practice, and we'll walk right by his home.
Right. So example, this, I believe it's this house with the red metal roof, which a board member of ours lives in now. It was actually built, designed by a local architect, white architect, who was also at one point president of the Germantown Historical Society. So again, you start to get a sense that, you know, Dr. Warwick moving into this block, you know, so he's rubbing shoulder to shoulder with you know, attorneys and architects and others. So 31 is the number we're looking at, I think just up here.
Yep.
So again, I think part of what we were saying before that we really want to point out is this was a really important place in a number of ways, but now you probably wouldn't glance twice at the, got some bumps here, at the house. But you know, in its day, everyone knew where it was, who was there. Dr. Warwick served primarily a white clientele as a doctor. He would also see black patients, but again, from the oral histories we have, basically said that if you were black, you had to go around back, wait in the shed or the kitchen. So he was in effect replicating that kind of segregated environment that was predominant in most of the other institutions.
Was he born and raised in Philly?
Yes, yeah, I believe so. So 31, the one that's the enclosed porch there, that was Dr. Warwick's house. Supreme, maybe that'll be our next historic marker we can we can get up.
Yeah.
And where was this hospital that was named after W. Du Bois?
Frederick Douglass.
Oh, Frederick.
Yeah.
So Douglas is in West Philadelphia.
West Philly.
Was it West
Mercy
Philly?
Douglas? Is that what
It was Frederick. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not.
I think that's West Philly.
I've never
Okay.
heard of it.
But this is the home here. Where,
Right.
Oh, that's his house?
Yep. Yeah.
And it was a twin?
There's a twin. Yep.
It has the 1752 marker
Oh.
when it was built. So I guess that will be the next.
Yeah. We'll see if we can get a state historic marker here at some point. Again, he would have been the first, as far as we know, black homeowner on this particular block section. And you're really only half a block off of Germantown Avenue. You can see from here First United Methodist Church, which was one of the major Protestant congregations in the neighborhood, and then on the other side, Germantown High School, which again opened in 1910 as the largest, most modern high school in the country. Yeah.
So we just came off of Callum, right up McCallum Street to Pomona. Between Pomona and Johnson is where the Baugh Press was, where the Baugh family lived, and where the press is. Sit right off of Jefferson Street. Right now, there's no marker for Jefferson Street, so we're thinking it may be Pomona or right between Pomona and Johnson.
Some of the street names in the last 100 years have shifted slightly. When Germantown was formally absorbed into the city in the 19th century, it had duplicated a lot of names that were used elsewhere in Philadelphia. So a lot of the street names had to be changed, so you wouldn't confuse which Walnut Street or which Cherry Street or whatever, Main Street.
And what's really interesting is the home of the Baugh family still exists and looks really similar to the photo that we have in the souvenir publication.
Do the people who live in there now, do you know if they're aware of the significance of the house?
I don't. That's interesting. Because when I saw the photo in the souvenir, I knew exactly where that was because that's the actual neighborhood I grew up on. I grew up around the corner from that. And so I took us right there to the home. But it'd be interesting to
Yeah,
to see.
I would say probably not for most of the private homes, if folks realize that, or even some of the other
Because the
institutions.
turnover system.
Yeah. So we mentioned William Byrd before. He was a quarryman initially, and then became a builder and an investor, leader in his church, helped start a number of other institutions. The number that we have, and I think it may be even higher, that he built at least 50 homes in different parts of the neighborhood. He also came up in the 1890s from Virginia, part of that early migration.
And he owned a home on East Upshur.
Right.
And his rock quarry was right off of, you know where Roosevelt Middle School is, on Washington Lane, right at Musgrave. And so there's a series of
Garages now.
garages now.
Yeah.
And we surmised that garage area was his rock quarry, yes.
He was a founding member of Mount Zion Baptist Church, led the Sunday school there for many years. So again, just an illustration that, if you were a leader, you're expected to lead in a number of different areas, right? No, you can't just show up and go to church, right? You've got to step in and really take ownership. He's died relatively young, 63, 1933. He's buried in Willow Grove in Fairview Cemetery.
And he had one of his homes burned down by the Klan in 1929.
Right. I think his daughter was living there at the time. I think, yep. Again, the Klan that started in Pennsylvania, not a ton has been written about it, but Pittsburgh and Philadelphia were the two major hubs for it. It started mostly in the 20s. A lot of anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic background, anti-Black, of course. So it wasn't the immediate post-Civil War Reconstruction era Klan from the South. It was a big intentional push to kind of grow the Klan in the North. Again, someone needs to do some research, graduate thesis on it, because there's not a lot of information around their activity in Germantown, other than the fact that we know they were pretty prominent.
Yeah, I heard there was a pretty big population here.
Yeah. I mean, second only to Pittsburgh, I think, from what I've read. There's been at least one academic article that we have on the Klan in Pennsylvania. Supposedly there are files somewhere in the state capitol archives that could be researched.
Right around the corner from the Baugh Press and Home is where the Grace Baptist Church on Johnson Street stands now.
Right.
That originally was erected on East Sharpneck Street, the unit block of East Sharpneck. And now is the home of another church.
So again, I think you start to get spatially the sense. So here's this major institution, not that new wing, but this one built in 1910. A block or two from Black-owned churches. Actually, just around this side are James Memorial Church, which is one of the churches named in the souvenir. About 160 years old at this point. Yeah.
And we see some of the cobblestone and some of the bricks and cobblestone that were provided to build Germantown Avenue were provided by Byrd from his rock quarry.
Germantown Avenue would have been, as it is now, a kind of mixed-use commercial quarter, 1913 certainly, with churches and schools and some houses. The majority of the businesses owned by white people, but as we'll point out, interspersed in there are Black-owned businesses as well.
And it's really interesting because Germantown and Mount Airy has been known to be one of the most integrated parts of the country.
Germantown had its own town hall for many years. It was kind of a semi-autonomous municipality. And this is actually modeled off of the Merchants Exchange down in Old City Society Hill, the old 18th century U.S. building. It's been abandoned for a number of decades. There was actually a meeting last week presenting some new plans to turn it into a school, a charter school for kids that are basically learning building trades. So it's been controversial for, well, this building, three of the biggest buildings in Germantown have been abandoned for the same time. This building, the high school, and the Y building are locked down. And so it's just, there's been a lot of community concern and action around what's going to happen. And at this point, this is commercial, kind of market rate condos or apartments. This may be a school. I'm not sure how likely that is. Yeah.
And the unique,
Yeah.
the interesting point about that is the three institutions that have been abandoned for so long were really key anchor institutions in the Germantown community.
Right.
And so now there's a community interest to revitalize these particular areas.
Yes, we have
I thought that was
copies.
interesting.
We have copies of all the plans that we got. So the Hidden City did. I don't know.
I did that
Hidden
tour.
Hidden City did an event here. I don't know, 10, 15 years ago.
That was cool.
They made copies of the drawings, and somehow we ended up with them.
Okay.
So I don't know where the actual originals are, but we have copies of all the floor plans and drawings that the architect did. It's
Yeah.
like 50 pages. It's a
Yeah,
lot.
you said that was a big help.
Yeah. The buildings that we just, in effect, rediscovered as its identity. It's the office of the real estate agent. So there was an agent whose really primary interest was helping the people moving up from Virginia, Maryland, Delaware find housing here. Typically, again, trying to guide them to parts of the neighborhood that were mixed or predominantly African American. And it really looks anonymous now. We identified it because this building is so distinctive. And in the photographs, we can identify this one and then this one next to it with the unfortunate vinyl siding is the office of the real estate agent. So this building, again, one of those completely now anonymous places. Last time we looked, this was actually a daycare center. So that looks like that's moved as well.
So we're talking about this building existing in the turn of the 20th century,
Right.
coming into the 20th century. And so at that time, we had a black real estate owner.
George Dean, yep, that was his name. William Byrd later on became a real estate agent as well, the builder and quarryman, but in 1913 he wasn't in that business yet, so George Dean was the person. If you were coming up and you didn't know anyone, this is where you went to try and find business. So this building, this low building on the corner that has the Dominican Beauty Salon awning, that we think is where what Baugh called the oldest barber shop in town. So that's where men would go to get their hair done. So in some ways, it's interesting that it's still a place for hair care, but it's not the historic building clearly that would have been there. But again, I think it just also illustrates we have interspersed with all the other commercial buildings, black-owned businesses. And in these cases, primarily with the black clientele. John Trower's catering will end with that building is really the reverse. The clientele was pretty much 100% wealthy white businesses. You know, he did catering for the rail companies, the shipbuilding companies up and down the East Coast. So.
However, he was able to employ blacks from the community.
Now Trower was liked a lot by Washington. Washington actually wrote a profile about him. And I think he subscribed to the philosophy. He used a lot of his money to create the Downingtown Industrial School for Colored Youth, which really taught black boys primarily the trades. So Washington was very much into practical trades as a way for social and economic uplift, and wanted to basically accommodate within the system that was existing. Du Bois was much more, let's tear down the system or rebuild the system. And Washington goes, we can do all right. Yeah.
If you were to go right up Rittenhouse on the east side of Germantown Avenue, you'll find some of the other churches that are mentioned in the Souvenir of Germantown. Right, you'll go right back into the row homes.
Yeah.
Then right on Musgrave and off a couple of the small streets, you'll see some of the churches that have been depicted in the Souvenir of Germantown that still exist.
Just want to point out the Women of Germantown mural. Dinah, who we mentioned briefly earlier, she was the woman that was enslaved by the Logan family at Stenton, and so she's depicted here. We don't actually know what she looked like, so this is a conjecture of what she might have looked like.
But it sounds to me she looked like a hero.
Yeah. There's actually a lot of work. There's the first public monument to a black woman built in the city was the Dinah monument at Stenton that just was opened 2 years ago, created by Karen Olivier, who's a Germantown sculptor, and they're doing a big event around Dinah. Trapita Mason, the former poet laureate of the city, former director of Historic Germantown, is doing a big multimedia poetry meditation around Dinah's life.
There's an interesting dialogue going on around her intentions and her reasoning for saving the building and how that actually transpired. There's a lot of dialogue going on in that regard.
Right. The myth is that in the 1777 October, Battle of Germantown is raging. British redcoats are going down. They're about to burn the mansion, and they're basically looking for folks, and she basically diverts them, saying, hey, they went into the barn this way. So basically she diverts them through her quote-unquote quick thinking, and that may have been true. It got popularized at the time by a lot of kind of white authors as an example of quote-unquote the faithful servant, right? Here's someone that was so beloved her family and this place that she went out of her way to save it. And I think that's what Supreme is saying. We're really trying to understand and complicate that narrative a lot, and learn more about her life. We know that she had a husband, she had a child and a grandchild, and we know at least their first names. We don't know where she's buried exactly.
And so the dialogue others present is that she saved her own home.
Right.
As opposed to the home of someone who particularly owned it during that day of time.
This building, as we mentioned, this is the Germantown Y building. It's been also closed for a number of years. Another institution that was beloved in the community. A lot of people learned how to swim in this building for a lot of the 20th century. It became integrated in the 50s, I believe. There's a separate Y that was up the avenue several blocks. That was the colored Y, so-called. It was created after the Souvenir. That's why it's not mentioned in the Souvenir. It certainly would have been one of those institutions, though, that Baugh would have highlighted. Back into Vernon Park. center in the park. This was the public library building for decades. Supreme, did you go?
I did.
Yeah, that was your library.
I went to the library,
Right.
played in this park. This was in the 60s and 70s.
So this building here is ACES Museum. It's also known as Parker Hall. It was a black USO hall in the post-World War II era. So it and the third floor featured bands and dances, and it's a really important kind of social hub. So Dr. Althea Hankins has her medical practice here, but she also started this unique museum, unique in the country in terms of documenting and celebrating the contributions of African Americans, Latinos, Indigenous women in World War II, and really basically saying, hey, we wouldn't have won the war without these contributions. So, and unfortunately, recently, a lot of the history that's been talked about and documented recently is being taken down in a lot of military sites, or U.S. military sites. We're good. Privately owned. It's a nonprofit museum. The building is privately owned. There's been some work to stabilize it, and some more that's needed to be done to really get it into tip-top shape. Right now, Parker Hall on the third floor is not publicly accessible, so we hope to change that soon. The last place we'll look at is this bright blue building just in front of us. That is it's a restaurant now, but that was John Trower, one of his headquarter buildings, where his catering service. He had ice cream manufacturing, he had catering. Trower, again, was called the wealthiest, or one of the wealthiest black men, and certainly in the Commonwealth, and probably in the country as well. He owned a lot of properties here. He was the superintendent of his church. He helped the National Baptist Convention quite a bit. And as we said, is really a philanthropist, started a new school, gave a lot of his money away. When we dedicated the marker, 4 or 5 years ago, Supreme? Yeah. We had a lot of his family, his descendants, come back and help with the ribbon cutting. We have in our collections one of the pieces of china that he would have as part of his catering company. It's embossed on the back with the John Trower Company kind of logo and insignia. So he came up from Virginia, then to Maryland, and then to Philadelphia. Catering was a business in the 19th century that was largely dominated by African American practitioners in the city. If you wanted a good caterer, that's where you went. There were a number of fortunes made, if you will.
We can cook.
Now, what was being cooked was it was whatever the popular food was for the white elite at that time in history. So,
I grew up knowing.
Yeah.
This community grew up knowing that there was a historic property here, and something in Black history existed here. And there were many stories that we had of what it was. And then I guess it was a few years back when we started doing the research with the Pennsylvania Historic Society, I guess, and found out exactly what took place there, and we had that marker unveiled.
Is the Crab House still open? Still running?
It is.
Yeah. So it's a restaurant now.
It's a restaurant and bar now.
Yeah.
And
So that was his business location.
that was business. He actually had the building went all the way up and then L'd around. So he originally had a place just down on Shelton Avenue. This was a bank building, and the bank closed. He bought the bank building, moved his operation there, expanded his operation. So he owned houses in Ocean City where he would vacation. He owned a number of rental properties in Germantown. including right by our offices on Schoolhouse Lane. Yeah, he was doing pretty well for himself. So that's our little mini tour of the Souvenir of Germantown.
Yay!